Live a Live is a special game. Normally, I wouldn't put a heavy spoiler warning on a nearly 30-year-old game, but since it's very niche and no doubt illegal for most, if not all, of my viewer base to play, I will say now that I'm gonna be talking a lot about endgame content as part of my own contribution to this One Villainous Scene series of videos that has fascinated me over the past couple days. While Live a Live's main 7 chapters are all fantastic, the first of the 2 unlockable chapters is what really makes the game special. Each of the game's chapters is meant to pay homage to a certain genre of film, be it the spaghetti western cowboy chapter, the sci-fi chapter's unique blend of 2001: A Space Odyssey and Alien, the anime-inspired mecha chapter, complete with its own 1980s anime intro theme, or the martial arts-themed ancient China chapter that almost feels like it was pulled straight out of an old black and white Hong Kong film. However, there are 2 exceptions to this. Wrestler, which is effectively just a turn-based Street Fighter, and Knight. Knight, first off, is only unlocked when you clear the 7 main chapters, so that means it's gonna do something a little different going by the logic games like to use, especially back then. But most importantly, it's themed around fantasy RPGs. A silent protagonist turned into being the hero with Oersted, his magician friend, and the thematic opposite, Strabo. The former hero pushed away by society, Hash, and the wise cleric Uranus on healing duty, all to defeat the Demon King and save Princess Alicia so that she may be married to our hero and they may rule the kingdom of Lucrezia together. Or however it's pronounced. I'm gonna call it Lucrezia. I'm not sure if that's right, but that's what rolls off of my tongue. Every other chapter until this point has been fairly straight played. If you know what the theme is, you'll probably understand what's going to happen. Knight, at first, isn't too different from this. Oersted wins a tournament that we only really see the final 2 fights of, the last of which being against his dear friend, Strabo. Him and Alicia have a heartwarming moment together before she gets stolen by a horrible, nasty, gargoyle-like demon. Oersted vows to save her and Strabo tags along, but the demon tower is locked behind a magic sword, which only Hash has. But he's resistant. He doesn't want to be a hero anymore. He's given up on society. But Uranus agrees to help them, as he still sees the faith in mankind. And so they climb the tower together to become heroes and defeat the Demon King once again. The first big difference, however, starts during this major boss fight. If someone pays attention, the Demon King shown here is a little different from the Demon King we saw as decorated statues leading up to this room, some even depicting the bosses from previous chapters. And Hash makes a comment to this effect, claiming that that can't be the Demon King. The Demon King was much stronger. Although, that's only where their troubles begin. See, not only does Strabo get caught behind in a cave-in, but Hash has the plague. This was his last hurrah, his ticket to Valhalla, if you will. And he didn't get to die a hero. He died of a horrible disease. This isn't the ending a hero is supposed to have. There's no save the princess here. There's not even like a happy anything. Oersted failed, but this isn't the end of the chapter either. No, a hero doesn't give up that easily. They return back to the castle and tell the king what had happened and decide, well, we'll rest up tonight and try again tomorrow. After all, a hero doesn't give up, like I said. But Oersted has a bad dream about Alicia and the things that might happen to her. It when he wakes up, he sees the ghost of Strabo walking out of the room, showing him that a horrible creature is in the middle of the castle, some strange shadowy figure that takes the form of this fake demon that they attacked back at the top of the Demon King's tower. And so Oersted, being the hero, does what any hero would do. He fights the darkness and destroys it. But this, too, is fundamentally wrong. If a particularly observant player pays attention to this fight, they'll notice a few things. There's no music. It doesn't have any attacks it can use to fight back. The battle sprite might look like the fake Demon King, but doesn't resemble its overworld sprite at all, and no matter what move you use on it, it dies in one hit. And worse yet, when it does die and you're returned out of the battle screen, all you see is the corpse of the King of Lucrezia. And nobody really knows what happened except Oersted when knights and the right-hand man of the king see him standing there with his sword in hand and the king dead. Only Uranus believes him, and Uranus rightfully chews them out over it, but he's arrested as well for the heinous crime of believing in the man everyone was heralding as a hero just a few hours before. Everyone only sees the man that killed their king, and they even begin to suspect that Oersted would have killed Strabo, his friend, that their hero was a demon. And I'd like to make a note of the music that plays during this chapter, while Oersted is fleeing the castle at Uranus's behest. See, each chapter in Live a Live has a musical theme tied alongside the scenario. We have the upbeat, more primitive dance theme of the Caveman chapter's battles. We have the contemplative woodwind of the ancient China scenario as we wander around town and along the mountain. The opening theme to the sci-fi chapter is this sort of Tron-esque synths that leave you slightly unsettled and worried for what's going to happen. And in the Western scenario, there's a literal mariachi band playing. Yoko Shimomura has an attention to detail, and the field theme for the night scenario is no different. It's fairly standard for a RPG overworld theme, if not a little somber, but its name translates to either Forgotten Wings or Wings That Don't Reach, depending on how you read it, which encapsulates what it must have felt for Oersted to ascend the Demon King's tower. And now his only option is to flee his home, except that everyone sees him as a demon. All but a small child whose parents tried to hide him, and an old man who got arrested for doing that. His wings didn't reach, and he plummeted to the ground, and after wandering around all night, he realizes the only option is to simply allow himself to be captured and hope that he can explain the situation. He didn't kill the king, not on purpose anyways. It must have been some trick, some witchcraft, you know? And he was their hero yesterday. They surely would listen to him. But it also meant that if they didn't, he would have to accept blame for something that not only did he not do, but the true culprit might never be known, let alone proven. But he does run into a stroke of luck here, since his cell is next to Uranus, his one remaining friend and ally, still trying to convince everyone that neither of them are demons. After all, Uranus is both a pious man of the cloth, and one of the men who defeated the previous Demon King, and even his words fall on deaf ears. As he prepares himself to use the last of his power to free Oersted, he tells the young knight something important. They've tortured me so much, but I never stopped believing in you. I'm starting to understand why Hash hated people so much. But You know, Oersted, you have nothing to gain by hating humans. So there's this line that is repeated throughout the chapter. As long as there's someone who still believes in you, anyone can be a hero. And Uranus half echoed this line while saying, I am that person. And it's a powerful statement, to be sure, one Oersted holds very close to his heart, keeps him moving. From the second castle escape across the fields and forests of Lucrezia, all the way back to the tower of the Demon King, he has to slaughter guards, people he respected in self-defense, and enters the tower to see monsters shaped and named after his worst fears, some of which being boss fights. The last one most notably being gynophobia, the fear of women. And then he ends up back to where Hash and Strabo died. And yet the rubble is gone. All the evidence of the cave-in has vanished. What's going on was the question I asked when I walked into this room the first time I played, and no doubt Oersted probably asked himself the same thing, silently. Walking through, he sees none other than Strabo standing at the peak. As it turns out, he had decided to save Alicia himself and set up everything that happened. The cave-in, the death of the king, everything. He even admits that he wanted to make Oersted suffer, all because he had to play second fiddle to everything Oersted did. Or, as he says it in his words, you ruined everything. You always have. No matter how much I help you out, you always take more, more, more. Even in the tournament, how I suffered that night. Do you think that I'd let you forget? But this time, I'll strike you down. Today, I make up for the past, when I was your hapless foil. He then rises in the air, emitting arcane power, and the game's main boss theme, Megalomania, starts to play. Keep in mind, everything I told you up until this point, all of the pain, all of the suffering, as Oersted sees who he thought was his closest friend come back from the dead just to kill him. Now, in 2014, Yoko Shimomura came out with a compilation album called Memoria. This is the second of these albums where she takes some songs from her previous works and rearranges them. One of these was Megalomania, which had both a vocal and instrumental mix in it. And if you pay attention to the lyrics of this version of Megalomania, they're talking about this fight from Oersted's perspective, when in-game the song's title and timing is themed around seeing the villain, a martial arts instructor who's hell-bent on proving his style is unbeatable, a shogun who became a demon to take over Japan, a wrathful ghost of a Confederate soldier claiming your land as his own through fear, and even a computer AI who believes the only way to save its ship is to kill all the humans on board, just to name a few. Also a deified T-Rex. Live a Live is a weird game. Now, if what I've told you up until this point doesn't give you a bit of insight to the devastating mindfuck that Oersted has gone through over the course of maybe a day and a half at most, go ahead, pause this video, listen to that version of Megalomania, and come back. Now, the best part, Strabo is far, far stronger than he ever would be on a casual playthrough in this fight. You have to go out of your way to grind to make Strabo this strong, implying he's either been holding back or training until now specifically to kill Oersted. But if you grind like a madman, you get to see this version of Strabo you eventually have to fight. You'll know his skill set. You'll see what you have to prepare for, what moves he has, the things he can pull on you, what powerful magic he possesses. And as an ally, this is amazing. He becomes one of the best party members you can have if you use him right, but as an enemy, it's terrifying for the same reasons, although the AI isn't good at using his moves other than turning the field into whatever elemental nonsense he wants to make sure is constantly ticking you for damage and healing him. But the worst part? When Strabo does die, when you inevitably defeat him, out comes Alicia. She sees Strabo dead, his blood on Oersted's sword, and she gives her second and final heart to the knight. She waited for him, but it was Strabo who came instead. He saved her, cared for her, explained why he did what he did. They fell in love, and she accused Overstead for being incapable of understanding how awful it must be to always be the loser. And sure, the magician probably never told her the whole story, but she still understood him. She still loved Strabo for what he was willing to show her, and whether or not it was a manipulation, it doesn't matter. After she's done explaining that to Oerstead, she claims she'd never want to leave his side and kills herself right then and there. And if any of you have noticed the title of the video, then I'm sure you know that the villain I'm making this essay about isn't Strabo. In Live a Live, there is an entity called Odio that appears under different names throughout the game. It's more an entity, a cosmic constant, maybe even an idea than a character. But every final boss of every chapter is an Odio in one way or another. Even the T-Rex was named ODO by its worshippers who predate language, but let's not think about that too much. The computer program I mentioned before happened to have its designation as OD10. Some are pretty clever about it too, like the wrestling chapters Odie Oldbright, and the ninja chapters Ode Io. And I apologize if I completely butchered that pronunciation, but I'm assuming that that pronunciation is how the joke works because Japanese name puns. And after Strabo and Alicia dies, for the first time in the entire game, we see the real Odio, the face behind these phantasms. And we get a flashback of everything that's happened up until this point. Right before we get the first spoken lines of this entire chapter from our protagonist, as he finally snaps. Ones I would be doing a disservice not to read to you. There's nothing left for me. No place to return to. Nobody to love. Nothing to believe in. Nothing but demons. I will become a demon. In doing so, I shall teach humanity the folly of their selfishness. From now on, I am no longer Oerstead. I am the Demon King, Odio! This scene has been living in my head rent-free for years. Nothing is more dangerous than a man who's lost everything. Many stories have been written about this, and it's easy for someone to become the monster everyone thinks they are. I've had to stop myself from doing that in the past, but fortunately for Strabo, he did exactly what he wanted to do and flung Oerstead into the depths of despair. He turned Lucrezia's knight into a broken, hollow shell of what he once was. But this isn't the final chapter of the game, and since I'm already spoiling the game's biggest plot twist, I may as well tell the rest of the story. The final chapter kicks off with the protagonists of the previous chapter appearing in Lucrezia against their will after being flatly kidnapped by Odio. across time. They see the fallout of what happened. The kingdom flooded with monsters from all across the cosmos. The people vanished. The tower locked behind refinding the legendary sword Hash once used. How exactly this all happens depends on who you pick, of course. Any of the previous chapter characters can be chosen as the protagonist of this one. But they all start at a place fitting of who they are. The caveman in a grassy knoll outside of civilization. The spacefaring robot at the highest point in the land. The protagonist of the martial arts chapter, your successor, begins at the top of the mountain looking over everything. And these are just to name a few. Along the way, they also have their own personal dungeons, which act as capstones to their story, and to get the true ending, you have to clear all of them, with one revealing the fate of the people of Lucrezia. Akira, the protagonist of the Mecha chapter, is a psychic, and that reference is absolutely intentional. He can teleport from battle as one of his psychic powers, which has a chance to land the player in a random location. This includes the Dungeon of the Mind, where he can read the souls of the dead by mind-reading fire pits. One of which being Strabo, who has the gall to ask if this was all his fault. Yes, it was. Maybe not completely. It is a game over if you lose the tournament, but get fucked, Strabo. At least Hash acknowledges he didn't exactly help much, and Alicia just wants the nightmare to end, but fucking hell, of course it's your fault. But you're not the villain of this video. You're not the one I'm putting under the microscope. So be thankful that I'll spare my words for you this time. And eventually, you clear all the dungeons, you get the mighty magic sword, you collect all of your party members, and you climb the tower, just as Oerstead once did, and come face to face in Odio in his true form. And this is not an easy fight. If you don't come in prepared, if you skip a couple optional bosses, he has no mercy for you. And everything he does is potentially very lethal. But if you persevere, if you cross all your T's and dot all your I's, then eventually you win. And once you do, you're given a choice. Do you kill Oerstead or spare him? If you kill him, you get a rather somber ending where everyone is trapped in this lifeless kingdom and simply continue existing. But if you spare him, then you proceed back down the tower and get a boss rush against every chapter boss. Granted, they're all pretty easy. They're exactly the way they were when you fought them the first time, and well, the only one that really doesn't change much because of this is the Mecha chapter, since you get back in your mech, but aside from that, this is a cakewalk. And this leaves Oerstead at just the final moment of desperation to ask a very simple question. Why? Why can't I win? What makes you so different from me? And each of the heroes have a similar history to him. Abandoned by society, ostracized for things outside of their control, and many of them had to watch those closest to them die. Even Cube, a robot who had booted up for the first time at the start of his chapter, had only known suffering for the first few hours of his life. The only exception to this is maybe Aboro, the ninja I mentioned, but he can be seen as simply a mindless killer following orders depending on how you go about his chapter. And in that sense, he's still largely the same person as Orsted. He's just being the monster that everyone's already labeled him as. But my favorite answer to this question is if you play as Lee, a bandit girl who had lost everything before the events of the chapter and had to be taken in by the unnamed martial arts master you play as in that chapter. He believed in her and he didn't give up on her. You remind me so much of myself. I used to envy people the way you do, but it's wrong. Just because you want something doesn't mean you'll get it, but if you persevere, you will get what you deserve in the end, I think. So, as long as you do not give up, you'll succeed. Just never give up. That's all I have to say. And regardless of whose you play as, he has a brief moment of humanity as, for just a second, he's no longer Odio and goes back to being the Oersted that we started the night chapter as. And if you do play as Lee, he simply warns her not to become him, to never give up on her humanity. As he starts to die after this heartfelt exchange, he gives the second half of this game's thesis. But don't forget, anyone can become the king of demons, as long as hatred still exists in any world at any time. Please don't forget that. Odio, you see, is the Latin word for hate, and if we're gonna go off of how Japanese name puns usually work, then Dio being also Latin for God means that Odio is probably supposed to roughly translate to God of Hate within this specific context. And in his one villainous scene, Oersted gave into that hate. Both his own internal struggles and the hatred of everyone around him being thrusted upon him, and he became the king of demons. He became the god of hate. And yet, I believe the two halves of this game's thesis are actually told in reverse. I'd argue it's supposed to be read in this way. As long as hatred still exists in any world at any time, anyone can become the king of demons. But don't forget that as long as someone believes in you, you can become a hero. This has been my entry into the One Villainous Scene project, collab thing, and also the foundation for something I was gonna make into a much larger thing, but I figure I may as well start here and now while the opportunity is right in front of me, where I want to make a series of videos breaking down the different chapters of Live a Live like this, sort of going through them and talking about the themes as they come up. And while this one I had to speak of through a very specific lens, if anyone's interested in me just talking about this amazing game, then I'll do it. I I've been looking for an excuse to just run through everything and put it all under a microscope, because there's a lot here to talk about. And anyone new to the channel and found me through the One Villainous Scene, I'm sorry that I don't really do the video editing thing and there wasn't really anything interesting to look at. I'm just hoping that whatever I have on screen right now lines up with what I'm saying, but thank you. And I hope that you'll stick around and sort of watch as once every blue moon I post something new. And have a nice day. Just remember, someone believes in you. And even if you don't think they do, I bet you can find someone who's willing to say that you too can be the hero.